This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I want to share with you an interview that I just finished recently. Quite a fun interview, Jeff Malik. We covered all kinds of topics in my world, in my life. I quite enjoyed his questioning. But before I jump in, I want to remind you, if you'd like to see my free video, drop me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send that to you ASAP. A video that introduces you to that trend-following mindset, all that stuff in my world. Now, without any further delay, let's jump right into a recent interview of me. I hope you enjoy.
Good morning, Vietnam. Sorry, I've always wanted to do that and couldn't resist when we have a guest dialing into the pod from Vietnam today. We've joked in the past in a blog post that today's guest probably has a chart showing some huge trend in sugar or something tattooed on his back. He's a grade A, first ballot founding member of the Trend Following fan club, having written 4 books on trend following, translated into 14 languages, owning the trendfollowing.com URL, and being the host of the popular Trend Following Radio podcast. For Trend Following beginner to master of the trade, we're sure that Michael Covel's name and works have popped up somewhere for you along the way. We'll be going through all that and more on today's episode. So thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How is my Robin Williams there? Do you get that a lot?
You know, when you're here, you don't. It's like being in a parallel universe. I'm in this place of money and economics and boom, and it's like a foreign concept for a lot of Americans if you've not been here.
I have never been there. So tell me a little about it. Tell me about the choice to live abroad. And you were kind of doing remote and work from anywhere way before the pandemic. So what drove you to go out east there?
I was happily existing in the States in 2012, and a nice bank in Hong Kong said to me, hey, do you want to do a speaking tour around Asia? It was going to be like 10 countries, 20 plus cities. I'd been to Asia before, but I thought, okay, this sounds cool. Why not? I'm single. I'll go on the 4-month all expenses paid, first class tour of Asia to talk to sovereign wealth funds, China asset management, every hedge fund and mutual fund across Asia. Why not? And I did. And it was really fun.
You never came back, or did you come back and then go back to Asia?
No, I kind of stayed. I mean, I visit the States and stuff like that. But anyways, in the middle of that 4-month tour, I had a 2-week break and I decided to go to Vietnam. The only country that I've ever been in my life where I knew no one on the ground. I had no contact there, zilch, nothing. Just the Americans showing up at the communist country where you need a visa, you don't speak the language, and you don't know anything. It was the most fun country in Asia. Hands down, not even close.
What countries did you visit? So you started in Hong Kong?
I was in Tokyo, I was in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, Bali, Bangkok, Phuket, you name it.
Vietnam was on the top of the list. And what town, what area are you in Vietnam?
I'm in Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon, but still called Saigon often.
Okay. Who calls it Ho Chi Minh? The locals do?
No, the locals call it Saigon.
And it's been fun? What's the virus been like there? I think Southeast Asia's been pretty good at keeping a lid on it, but how's it been with the pandemic?
100 million people in Vietnam, and I think they've had 35 deaths, which I think were the result of a Westerner coming into the country and getting into a hospital of old people.
100 million people in Vietnam? I would have guessed 30.
Yeah, 100 million and 35 deaths, 35.
So a little better than the U.S. What's everyone there think about us stupid Americans, of politics and all the mess we have over here?
Vietnam loves America. I mean, the Vietnamese people love America. Insane respect for. It's almost hard to figure out. We sort of started a war here and sort of killed 4 million people, and they love America.
Even today, they love you more? Or are they starting to shine's coming off the rose petal or whatever that saying is.
There's no shine coming off. If most Vietnamese had the opportunity to just go on a vacation to America, I think they would all take it just to try. They just all want to experience. Remember, there's 5 million American Vietnamese in America, so there is this connection where people in Vietnam hear the stories about America and they want to go and experience it and see it, etc.
And what you mentioned, it's booming, right? A lot of manufacturing moved out of China and into Vietnam. What's that whole story?
Booming and a lot of just economic development, building, first subway under construction. I mean, since I've been here, they built the 10th tallest building in the world in downtown Saigon. I mean, their desire is to reshape their cities to appear like Singapore. They're not close yet, but you can see they will get there.
And you'll be along for the ride. Any plans to leave, or you're there for the long haul?
I don't know if there was a plan to come here. Just go with the flow. Look, everyone in America who has been clocking in a 9-to-5 job for the last 10 years, doing whatever you're supposed to do, the things that I grew up with, not married yet, one significant lady in my life, but the things you're supposed to do, start the family, go to the baseball game, all this stuff. And then maybe people wake up one day and they say, well, is there something else that I have not experienced? Well, I'm kind of on that ride.
Yeah, my wife's brother, my brother-in-law has this thing that people should retire first and then work later. Work when you're older and don't have anything else better to do. And like go travel the world and have fun and do things when you're younger.
I like that idea.
Right. I don't know how we pay for it, but it's a good idea. So I love that. You might be hitting a little too close to home with my life filled with baseball games and family stuff. I get it.
Look, I love baseball. I played through my first year in college. I mean, I grew up with all that. I love it all. We only get one shot at this thing, this life thing, and you got to make choices and you can't do everything. It's interesting, right?
It's like the Sliding Doors movie or something. Like, who knows what path, if you had taken another path 6 years ago or said, no, I'm too busy, I can't take that Asian trip, whether you'd still be here or whether you'd be there or wherever.
I had a psychologist on my podcast named Alison Gopnik. She writes about something she calls Bayesian babies. And the idea is that when you're a baby, you don't really have a plan. You try something, and if it works, you try more of it. And you just kind of follow along the path. You just go, what's the path of least resistance that feels good? That's kind of how I'm here. It's not normal. It's not normal when you get to be an adult in America to have a Bayesian mindset, because what we want to do is plan everything. And if we see something that could be really interesting, if it doesn't fit into the plan, we literally don't do it. Of course, I'm also talking about trend following too. People get an idea of what they want to do with their investments. And if something all of a sudden does something unexpected, even if it could be a huge windfall, if they did not plan for it or predict it or imagine it happening, they don't do it.
So we've got a lot to cover on today's pod, but can you start with a little background on how you got into this crazy world of trend following?
I have to go back and look through my exact notes, but I think I read the Market Wizards book in early 94, I think. And then I found out about the turtles. I remember picking up a magazine in Borders Bookshop, summer of 1994.
Borders, rest in peace.
Yeah, it was Financial World's top 100 paid on Wall Street for the year of 1993, I believe. And number 35 or number 37 was Jerry Parker. And I actually have a picture of the article here somewhere. I'd have to find it. But Jerry Parker was number 35 or 37. I think it said he was 35 or 37 years old, and he had made like $35 million for the year of 1993.
35 cubed.
Yeah, and it was like a little brief paragraph, and it said he was a turtle trained by Richard Dennis. He was not close to Wall Street. He liked country music. He lived approximately at that moment in time 90 minutes from my house in Virginia. He was doing a trend tracking system. So for a guy who was thinking, with all of my bad grades, I'll never be reading balance sheets like Warren Buffett, I was like, who the hell is Jerry Parker? What is a turtle? What is a trend tracking system? Who is Richard Dennis? And it was that light bulb moment, because I thought to myself, if this guy exists, and I don't know anything about him, if he exists, that means anybody can do it. Now, that's a little naive, but it's a little true too. And that was my thinking. And I pulled on that string. It took a long while to meet Jerry, but I did. Piece things together. I put up a website in 1996 called Turtle Trader, and I had a first book come out in 2004 called Trend Following. My podcast started in 2012.
A few things there. One, I think that's probably the first and last time Jerry Parker's been called Wall Street. He probably didn't like that. And then two, he's great. We've had him on the pod with his pet parakeet. We've had Salem Abraham on, who was introduced to Trend Following from Jerry Parker. So yeah, once you start to peel back that onion and see all those layers of all the people, it's quite interesting. Some people, there was some confusion. I remember back 15 years ago when you were still in the US and we were doing some stuff together back at Attain days. Some people were saying, is he a turtle or is he not a turtle? You weren't an actual turtle yourself, right?
I don't think anybody ever thought that, except
it may have been one of our crazy clients or something.
The lunatics on the inside of assorted chat forums, perhaps. But no, I was just a guy who was inspired. And I've been my book, The Complete Turtle Trader, is very frank about that. And you just mentioned Salem. I don't think I could have written the book, The Complete Turtle Trader. I don't think I could have put that full story out there without Salem really opening up. He was the first person, even a little bit before Jerry. I think Salem was the first person to peel back. I mean, Jack had written some great books, but Salem was the first person to really add some context to the whole story. And especially Salem was so important because he was the guy that was really like, okay, here are the original turtles. And people can make an argument, oh, Rich picked these very smart people. And Rich did pick very smart people, i.e. Jerry.
It's also his money, right? Like, that's his right.
Right. But Rich also picked some absolute idiots. One of them has been in and out of jail for the last 10 years. So people could say, well, the turtle thing was special and it was confined. But Salem, of course, Salem, very special guy too. He really, I think, and I try to make the case with this, he took it from that kind of first generation Jerry to second generation Salem. And that kind of just inspired everybody to think, well, if I really want to be a quant, a trend following quant, I can take a shot at it.
Jerry, sure, he wasn't in the infrastructure, but he was up there in Chicago off the trading floor and working with these traders. Salem was just like, I'm going to do this from my ranch in Canadian Texas. So it's like, yeah, if you can do it from there, you could do it from anywhere, basically.
Jerry, though, I mean, in his start, he wasn't in Chicago. He was only there because Rich brought him there. I mean.
Yeah. Can you, just for our listeners, I'm sure 95% of them know the story, but can you give us a 2-minute overview of the whole Turtle Trader story as far as you unpacked it and found out about it?
Yeah, Rich Dennis was this really interesting guy, strong political views, strong personal views, made his first $1 million on the floor in Chicago in 1976, floor trader. And he had amassed
a lot of money in 76.
Yeah, huge amount of money in 76. And by 83, I think he had amassed a couple $100 million, 200 perhaps. He went and saw the movie Trading Places with his partner, Bill Eckhart, a quite well-known trader. They walked out, my understanding, and Rich said, we can train people. And Bill said, no, you can't. And they made a bet. They hired people off the street to prove that Rich was right.
From an ad in the Wall Street Journal, right?
Yeah, thousands of people applied. They selected approximately 20. They trained them for a couple of weeks. And at the end of that couple of weeks, sent them off to trade. At the end of 4 years, they made, north of $100 million. Then all of those turtle traders, nicknamed for many different purported reasons, from the musical group The Turtles to a Singapore turtle breeding farm to a group of young guys that wanted to be turtles. I don't know. I've heard all kinds of stories.
I'm going with the turtle farm.
Yeah, anyways, when it was all over, those students left working for Rich Dennis. They went out on their own, like Jerry Parker. Jerry, in the 90s ended up managing well over $1 billion. That was it. And that story inspired, I'd have to go look through my notes. I can't tell you how many professional fund managers have been inspired by that story. I believe that David Harding is on record. That was one of his early inspirations. And I think also, I know the new Jim Simons book that came out last year from Gregory Zuckerman, Simons talks about
My laptop's sitting on it right now.
Yeah, Simons talks about Rich Dennis being a huge influence where they went on his trading. So it's an amazing story. I think sometimes in the online world, people get lost in all kinds of whatever, but it's a really, really important story. It's not a cute story. It's a cute name, and that sometimes bastardizes the story, but it's not a cute story. It's a very important story for two reasons: the method and the act of learning, which gets the idea that you could transfer the learning.
And it predated, today you would transfer the learning via a computer model. So it predated computer models, it predated all that. So it was transferring the learning by a set of rules. It was essentially a computer program written down on a piece of paper.
Yeah, and some of the turtles ended up coding during that time there. I mean, if you go back to somebody even like Bill Dunn, who was a trend following trader early in the 70s, these guys were all coding things early, whether it was Excel or Lotus or Fortran. That was happening early. It was archaic looking compared to today, but you know, you don't need all kinds of, quote, fancy algos to be a trend following trader. That's not what it's about. Being a trend following trader and using code is more of an accounting issue than it is like some advanced algos to predict some nonsense. It's none of that.
And so the story grabbed you and you had never written a book. You're like, I need to write a book about this. What was that like, of going from, I love this story, I want to make money, to, oh, I'm going to write about it first?
Well, I had a website up for 8 years, kind of showing people what was going on behind the scenes with the turtles.
And the rules were sort of hidden at first from everyone, but now they're kind of commonplace.
Yeah,
Not by you, but I'm saying in general, that was some of the mystery around the whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. My first book came out in 2004. Then my book about the turtles came out in 2007. It was a long time coming for me to have a book about it.
What was the first book?
Trend following.
Got it.
5 editions into trend following now.
Right. So this one?
That's a beast, huh?
Yeah, I love this guy. Look, it's a little worn. I got a little worn on the edge.
If you don't read it, you can kill somebody with it.
Yeah. My favorite thing you did there, which I don't see a lot, is all the comments in the margin.
You know who told me that for the first time? The former very successful manager at Legg Mason, Bill Miller. One of the first professionals I talked to about that book. And here's this value investor in 2004 reading Trend Following, telling me how much he liked the comments in the margins.
No, I love that, because my brain goes right to, I want to read that first instead of all the stuff you put all the time and effort into.
It was just the cool leftovers that I knew I wanted to have in there, but I didn't know where to put them.
So there was that book, then the turtles, then the other trend following books. So did you think you always wanted to be an author? That just kind of was one of those Bayesian paths you took?
Yeah, for sure. I had terrible grades in school. I didn't care about school at all. Completely self-taught author, completely. Look, it's just another one of these little examples in life. I'm not tooting my own horn, but the reality is if you want to do something, you do it. If you don't want to do something, you talk about why you're not doing it.
Right. What advice do you have for other authors out there thinking, I've been trying to write a book for about 6 years. I can never finish it.
Because you're trying, you're not writing.
Because I have a day job, right? I know Taylor Pearson, who we both know of Mutiny Fund. He's told me that you pushed him to write his first book.
I actually still remember where we were when that happened. We were in a lobby in a hotel in Bangkok at a conference. He had some insights, and I thought he was a little indecisive. And he's a big guy. He's like 4 or 5 inches taller than me. And so I got in his grill, and I was like, dude, you got to write this. Don't give me any more excuses. Go write this book, something to that effect. It must have been quite a funny looking
exchange
to other people, because this guy, I'm 6 foot, but he's like 6'5". He probably could have picked me up if he didn't like what I was saying, but I looked a little crazy, so he was kind not to hit me.
Right. Well, he did it. The rest is history. Do you follow his blog as well? He puts out nice essays and whatnot on them.
Yeah, I see some stuff. Yeah. It's tough when you do a podcast. I don't know how many episodes you guys are into now, but I'm doing a couple a week. You sort of lose track of the rest of the world when you're doing a podcast that requires a couple episodes a week. You're like, what's going on with the rest of the world? I don't know. Where am I? What country am I? I don't know. What's going on? Who knows?
Right. You're just so into those guests and into what they have to say. And some of the stuff you're talking about is, you're not talking about current events. You're talking about philosophically and what you need in order to stick with the trend and things like that from a behavioral standpoint.
All the guests I try to have on my show I want everything to be timeless. If I'm talking only current events, I've kind of screwed up.
Right. I listen to those, mostly sports podcasts, but those have their place, but not for our world.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I do occasionally like to listen to Skip Bayless for a period of time.
Yeah. And then you mentioned you played baseball in college. Where was that?
I played at Randolph-Macon for a year, small college in Virginia, but I played with a lot of guys that were really good. But after my first year, I was like, okay, I'm going to transfer somewhere, go transfer to Division I, play somewhere. But then at that level, it ceases to become fun. It becomes a job. It almost felt like military to me. I was like, well, this is no longer fun.
Especially when you're in college. You're going out to run at 6 a.m. and your friends are coming home.
And it's like that famous line in the movie Moneyball, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but there's something to it with baseball when they tell you you can't play anymore, or when you stop playing, there's this feeling. It's almost a depression. I mean, look, I got a buddy who got to AAA, was going to make the Astros out of spring training back in the 90s with Biggio and Bagwell, was going to be their fifth starter. In a spring training game, actually struck out Cal Ripken and Brady Anderson, tore his rotator.
Oh.
Never got it back again. With baseball, it's a funny thing, man. Can you imagine? I mean, just imagine getting to that level, and you know what the income potential is. You know what the earning potential is, and a shoulder gives out on you. Ugh, terrible.
He struck out Cal Ripken one more time than you or I have. Speaking of famous people, so one of the favorite parts of your books for me are the stories about all the legends in the space. So tell us a little bit about some of the people you've highlighted. My short list is Harding, John Henry, Bill Dunn, Sequoia, and more. Give us some stories. We've talked a little bit about Salem and Jerry. What other stories do you have from some of those chats?
All their trading success is pretty well known. People can see that in my books. I think the fun part for me was how I ended up meeting a lot of them, how I ended up becoming friends often. I still think to the first experience meeting Bill Dunn. You couldn't get any more of a random experience. My father is a dentist. He says to me one day, he knows I'm doing this investigation in the mid-90s of all these traders, but he doesn't know anything about it. And he says to me, hey, you need to go talk to Marty. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, you need to go talk to your old baseball coach. I'm like, 10 years ago, Marty? He's like, yeah.
Wait, stop. Marty Dunn was your baseball coach?
Let me finish this one.
You got me overexcited.
I said, hold on. I'm like 26. You mean my baseball coach when I was 16? I need to go talk to Marty Bergen about what?
Bergen, yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
He's like, well, he works with some trader. I go and I meet with Marty, and Marty lived one block from my house in Vienna, Virginia. I had not seen him for 10 years. But then I pulled out the Stark report. I realized Marty was doing audit work for Dunn Capital, and I looked at the Stark report. I knew all about John Henry. I knew all about the Turtles, and I was like, who is this Dunn Capital? There's like no information in this guy. And his performance was massive. His assets under management was massive. His track record was out the wazoo long. I go to meet Marty. Marty sends me down for an informational interview. This is before Marty worked for Dunn.
Yeah, now he's in charge.
Yeah, he's the boss now. I go down and I meet with Bill. I still remember the handshake, the first handshake with Bill Dunn. Wow. Okay. Nobody. I mean, I'm a decently strong guy, and I was prepared for anything, but that guy, I mean, I'm sure there's someone listening that also shook hands with Bill Dunn in his prime. I'm talking, that was vice grip stuff, man.
Walter and Jeff Eisenberg in my office had been down there to Stewart and met him. Their favorite story there is they have the like mobile trading unit, or they used to back in the day, where they could load up the RV if a hurricane was coming and take the show mobile. I don't know if they still do that, but that was a good one.
To see at this time, we're talking like 1996, and I'm still kind of investigating things, and to see the Dunn office at that point in time. So here we are with a track record that's, I don't know, from like 74 to 96 already. I go in the office, and it felt like an accounting office or a legal office. And there was one monitor in the office at that time, and it was hooked up to some server sitting on the ground. And I was just meeting everybody in the office. And at some point in time, an alarm, like almost like a red alarm hanging on the wall. They're going to kill me if I'm saying this wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is true. It's like a red alarm hanging on the wall, and it kind of went off. And the guy that I was talking to casually got up, walked over, looked at the monitor. He said, we got a signal. He placed a call, came back and sat down with me. I mean, it was this most
A little
interesting.
different than a Goldman trade desk, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so that was done's more complicated today and whatnot. The root of their success is still in the rules and the philosophy. It's not that they have to be some show, the Solomon Brothers trading floor that everyone saw in The Big Short. It's none of that stuff. That was a fun experience. And I think also for me, meeting Ed Seykota for the first time was really interesting. And that was kind of a random thing. I had registered the domain name edseykota.com. I had registered the domain name for about every trader that possibly existed. I wasn't going to hold them hostage or anything. I just was going to create websites. One of his representatives sent me an email and said, hey, we'd like the Ed Seykota domain name. That's all they said. Signed the piece of paper, dropped it in an envelope, didn't ask for anything. Just sent it off, gave it to him. He asked for it. I gave it to him. A couple weeks later, they said, hey, do you want to come chat with Ed? And I went down and I chatted with Ed in the Virgin Islands. I think the first question he asked me was, what was Richard Dennis looking for when he selected his students? The first question he asked me. Just as an interesting guy. We were sitting in shorts and T-shirts with our hair looking crazy on the side of a beach drinking a beer, and he says to me, what did Rich Dennis look for?
And were you like, no, I'm supposed to be interviewing you?
I'm a young guy. I'm going to answer his question. I said I thought he was looking for people that could think in terms of odds. His next response, I'm pretty sure, because I've said this in books, I think I'm right in my memory. He said to me, who told you to say that? Realizing, okay, it's a whole different level of intelligence going on here. I'm not going to get away with bullshitting this guy.
Right. He's playing chess. You're playing checkers.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you ever meet John Henry or no?
I did meet him briefly. One question I asked him that really stood out, there was a hotel attached to one of the World Trade Center buildings in New York, a little Marriott or something, and he was speaking. I remember Peter Borsch was in the audience too. It was maybe like 50 or 60 people. And it was a couple months after he was on the other side of the Barings Bank trade. Afterwards, there was a cocktail party. Nobody was talking to him. He's the guy that just gave a speech. He's like standing in the middle of the room, kind of a busy cocktail event. If you get a bunch of bankers, a bunch of wanker bankers sitting around talking, they think that, but he's standing there and he's not a very big guy.
Pre-billionaire, right? So he doesn't have a target on his back.
If this was 1994, 5, or it's 1995, I guess.
Might have been there.
1995, he had to have been worth at least $500 million. You could tell he was a little nervous. Are people maybe just shy, introverted? I asked him about what kind of advice would he give to somebody that wanted to follow in his footsteps. His body language, he looked like he had the stress of the world on his shoulders at that moment in time. Not after winning the World Series, no stress then, but he just looked at me and he said, it never gets easy losing money for people.
Right. He was in a pretty hefty drawdown around then, maybe a little later, but.
No. 1995, that would have been a couple months after winning Barings. Behind the scenes, he would have been the most popular guy on Wall Street. It wasn't stated publicly that he was the winner to the opposite side of Barings and Leeson, but all the brokerage firms knew he was the big dog.
Have you analyzed that trade? He wasn't on the other side on purpose, right? It was just via the trend model?
Yeah, via his model. Now, look, at that stage of the game, can one theorize, okay, he was supposed to be Leeson's long, he's short. Could I theorize? Could I speculate? Could I hypothesize that possibly as Leeson was long and he was short his system, that he had some information through channels? I'm just completely guessing. I don't know that this to be true in any way, shape, or form, but nobody else made, I don't think, as much money. I mean, other traders made a lot of money on that trade. Bill Dunn, for example, but John really made a bloody fortune. Now, it could have just been a function of what his assets under management were at the time, too. I think he was much larger than other traders at that moment.
I love it. That's a story for another day. What's that movie with, who's the guy who plays Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Yeah. Did they even talk about John Henry in that?
I don't think so. And not that I can remember. I haven't seen it in a long time. Not that I can remember.
The only reason I learned about that, though, was being in a room where the head of two brokerage firms were talking about who was on the opposite side, and I overheard the conversation. Overhearing that conversation, I decided to run with it and make it a central point of my trend following book in 2004.
And did everyone ever come tell you that you got it wrong?
I wouldn't be talking to you if I got it wrong.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. 10 people told me I got it wrong, but I still go there. I still tell the story.
If I got it wrong, Mike would have been facing a lot of pain.
Yeah. And then there's those videos of you and David Harding walking through London. I actually met with him once and did a little interview. We put a blog post out, but what was he like for you?
He was cool. I had a chance many times to meet up with David. He was very down to earth. The very first time I met with him was before those videos. That was done for a documentary film. And again, I'm not trying to tell trading stories. I think if anybody takes something from this, it's like, okay, if you're interested in something, if you're curious about something, ultimately it's like Anthony Robbins' advice. Go find the people that are doing it. Try and learn from them. Try and give them something. Maybe they'll give you something. But I remember it was after my trend following book, I decided to write a second book, maybe the January of 2005. So this is 8 months after trend following came out. And I just called up randomly 15 traders that I wanted to interview. They all took my call. 13 or 14 of the 15 agreed to interviews. And at the time, they were managing like a collective 15 billion under management. David was one of them. So on my dime, I just started flying around the world to talk to these people. David was one of them. And we just sat in his personal office. And I had not written about him in my trend following book. At least I don't think I had. He was very British. And he pulled up a monitor and he was showing me equity curves of various traders. And he was showing me the equity curve, some of the names that I've already mentioned. Then he was showing me his, and he was superimposing them. It was a return, maybe a cumulative return. And he was superimposing them. And at that moment in time, he didn't have to tell me anything. It's like, okay, clearly David is doing better than a lot of people. And it was kind of that toothy smile wink at me of like, hey, how come you didn't write about me? Clearly he was doing pretty damn good. That was fun. That was fun.
You were America-centric at the time. Your apologies.
The cool thing I remember about that, though, is that he, like me, he had no problem dropping the F-bomb. And so here I am interviewing him for the first time. I don't know how many F-bombs he dropped.
Really? I didn't get that.
Yeah, it was so fun. I'm not trying to say anything bad. Look, he's a normal guy. You know, he's done very well. He's a billionaire now. I always remember him as just a normal guy who shared with me, and I thought he's really down to earth, and that'll always be my takeaway. I don't know what happens when you become a billionaire, but I'm sure deep down he's still the same guy.
Of all the people, who'd you enjoy the best? Probably like picking your favorite child, but
I mean, we're talking some of the great thinkers. Forget just trading. These people are great thinkers, really self-aware, very clued into the markets, economics, philosophy, psychology. But I would say, and maybe if I had equal chance to be involved with all of them, I would have different views. Maybe you only get so much because you only have so much time. I think Ed Seykota had some kind of mystical intuition or perception of me that was, I don't know, almost eerie. That guy can see through everything. That was an interesting feeling. I still remember, too, after I met him, I did some searches, and he had a teenage son at the time, I believe. And I found his teenage son's math paper on the internet, and it looked like hieroglyphics. Like I had no idea what it was at all. And I thought to myself, my God, what is Ed? What is going on in Ed's head? Just this whole different level. But on the flip side, he was also a guy you could have a beer with and very gracious and...
Totally. You ever seen his video of him playing the guitar about the whipsaws?
I forgot Larry Height. I did an interview where I interviewed Ed and Larry Height in Chicago. I think it was in 2012. And Ed pulled out his banjo for that audience, like for the example. And David Harding was in that audience that day, pulled out his banjo and played that song for everybody. So it was great.
We'll put it in the show notes. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's something about the trend's your friend, and then you get whipsawed to a nice banjo tune. And you've talked a little bit, common traits are just they're great thinkers, unique thinkers. Any other common traits you think you saw between them?
I mean, skepticism. Skepticism basically doesn't exist in modern life for most people. Most people just accept what they're told. These kinds of people don't accept what they're told. They exist on the outside. Maybe that's the reason I would get along with them, is they could see in me, I had the same kind of personality that I just didn't care about all this other stuff.
Right. You weren't the next Bloomberg reporter coming to talk to him.
And look, the average person sees the net worth of John Henry or the net worth of David Harding, and they become, in their mind, gods, where I still see them as regular guys who put their pants on, very smart, some great success, but people have lost sight of how to analyze and figure out things. I mean, even a guy like Jeff Bezos, I mean, the reality is he put up a website. He started selling stuff. And then everybody realized you could buy stuff from there. It doesn't mean he's a god. It means he's a very smart guy who had a great idea. But I think we make people into gods instead of like understanding who they are and what happened in their life. And that's what's interesting to me.
There's a good Josh Brown blog post about the new American gods. And it's like Jeff Bezos, Apple. It's kind of saying those FANG stocks. Religion for most people of like, that's the new goal of everyone is to become there.
Look at this thing that just happened right now. This relatively young guy who started Zappos died, Tony Hsieh. When you hear a story that a guy who's 46 years old dies in a house fire worth $700 million, you say your first thought is, at least my first thought, and this is like I think some of the guys you're asking me about, I think their first thought would have been, that's not the real story. 99% of the world goes, that's the real story. Then the real story comes out and we all immediately find out, hold on, the guy that was writing books about happiness was perhaps one of the most unhappy people around. And that's not talking bad about someone who's not here. That's just doing an honest autopsy, an autopsy of life. And I hope people do it to me. I'm sure you hope people do it to you. Like rip us apart. Find out what makes us tick. Don't just read the headlines. Find out, is that person real? Is that person not real? Look, if you were here right now, I'm in a city of 15 million people. I could literally, I don't speak the language. I could take you and drop you off in some area, me and you, and it would look so foreign. You'd be like, where are we? We're completely lost. I have a sense of direction. I have a sense of knowing how to navigate it. And that's fun in life when you can start to understand the patterns of life and realize that all the headlines are just bullshit.
It's all noise. I love it. Right. It's hard for me because most of the people we're talking to on this podcast and in my day-to-day are huge skeptics. But I guess I'm in the bubble of the 1% who are skeptical in the world that way.
You're for sure in the bubble. We're all in the bubble.
I don't know. It's like in the Matrix. Just give me the pill and let me eat the steak and pretend I don't know it's real. Back to the book real quick. The one section I like in there, you have the drawdown charts of some of the most famous people and their big drawdowns. Bill Miller, Warren Buffett, 80%'s in there, 50%, 60%. It seems like managed futures and trend following sometimes held to a different standard or unfair standard when some of those icons have had these big drawdowns. You have any thoughts on that, why that is?
There's lots of people that want to manage lots of investors' money. So if somebody runs a big mutual fund that doesn't really do anything and has this hocus pocus annual report talking about how good they are at picking things and this and that, and then this alternative form of thinking, trend following, comes along and wants to bring assets from the mutual fund to the trend following world, well, yeah, they're going to say anything bad they possibly can about trend following, right?
Right. They're competing. Here, I pulled it up real quick from your book. Warren Buffett, 43%, although I've seen bigger than that in other books, 50-something. Ken Hebner, 56%. Harry Lang, 59%. Fidelity. Bill Miller, 50%. Ken Griffin, 44%. Carl Icahn, 81%.
I think that Munger in 73, 74, before his partnership with Buffett, Munger was in the 60s or 70s.
Yeah. Right. And that's when they decided to basically stop having clients and to create a company.
I don't know. Is this still a debate much? Is trend following a philosophy still really looked down on? I think there's enough smart people that have done enough big success at it. I mean, people can say, I don't want to do it, but I don't know if people really can say it's not valid. Is that not valid argument still out there?
It's still out there, not because of the sharp downturns, but because of the length. Basically, since 2009, it's been flat. I always use AQR's mutual fund now as kind of the proxy. And it went to 18 billion, and now it's back down to 3 or 4 billion. And I agree with you on the institutional investors. They get it. They just put some money, put an allocation in there and kind of set it and forget it. They know it'll be there when they need it. But I think for the grand majority of investors, and especially more retail investors, they can't handle, which you've written about, which we can talk about, but they can't handle the behavioral aspect of it. And they want the negative skew thing that's small up, big down. They prefer that because they never see the big down. They don't want to think about it until it happens. To trend volume can be the small down, big up.
It's going to be really interesting to see in our lifetime if we ever experience something in the States like Japan. Everything in America right now, by hook or crook, is built on having U.S. stocks at all-time highs. If that model doesn't exist, if U.S. stocks at all-time highs doesn't exist, and this means we could have U.S. stocks at all-time highs because we eliminate interest rates, because we sink the dollar, because XYZ, whatever.
And now they're holding hostage the stock market to you got to push through stimulus. You got to send people checks. We're going to have a little 2% down temper tantrum unless Congress figures out how to send everyone a check.
Well, and what's so interesting about this current all-time high moment where we have to take all these actions to get it there, the stimulus, the zero or negative rates, et cetera, no one seems to have any thought that this could break. I remember in my documentary film, Salem had this great analogy, and he kind of said it in this homespun way. He's like, no one thinks about the meteor hitting. They just don't have that in their calculus. And it's like, okay, if we're at this moment in time where we're doing everything we possibly can do to be at all-time high stocks, if you're an old person, put your money into all-time high stocks. If you're any person, put your money into all-time high stocks. Don't ask a question. Don't do anything. Just put it there. And don't think ever there could be a problem, because there can't be a problem, because we are the Wizard of Oz. That's where we're at today. That's life today.
And or they believe there could be a problem, so that might put it in trend following. But if it doesn't work for 6 months, then oh, this isn't working. I got to get back into what's working. You're missing the entire point. You're in there because it may one day not work. But right, if that stretches 5 years, that stretches 10 years, what if that goes 30 years? You'll even start to see institutions be like, you know what, this trend following is not worth it.
I think the other thing too in life, one has to decide what they want to be, because there's a lot of stress. If one says in their life, I don't understand anything, but the system told me I must be long stocks. I don't understand anything, but I must be long stocks. There's a hell of a lot of stress in that. Now, if you choose some other way to make your keep and you understand it, there's less stress over the course of a lifetime. If you don't constantly compare yourself to your neighbors. Because if you constantly compare yourself to your neighbors, that's a really crappy life. Oh, my neighbor's doing this, my neighbor's doing that. I mean, that's no way to live.
You got a big uphill battle there in the US, because that's what happens day in, day out with portfolios, right? Of oh, I know I'm in the right portfolio. I know I did the process well, but oh, wouldn't it have been great to be an only FANG, and wouldn't it have been great to own those Tesla calls? The neighbor effect is huge, and they want to just go into that.
That's just poison. I do tend to think, and not tooting my own horn, but I do tend to think that at some stage of the game, many people in the States, and maybe something like COVID helps to break it apart, people are just going to say this particular rat race that's been constructed for us, this particular matrix of thinking we must be in a 9-to-5 gig, working for the man, be stuck at all-time high stocks, never see any interest income, and then sit around and argue about which politician we like on the left or right. This doesn't seem like much of a solution for living.
Yeah, for happiness. It seems very noisy.
It seems noisy and messy as hell.
Do you think Sakota and John Henry and Dunn, you think they could do what they did back in the 70s and 80s today? The market for sure has changed, right?
I don't know. You just talked about the FANG stocks. I give Jerry Parker credit for this. What's trend following? Trend following is a philosophy, and then there's an assortment of instruments that can be traded. Now, of course, historically, at least from, let's say, the 70s until to the 2000s, it was typically defined around these commodity currency portfolios. Okay, but from a philosophical standpoint, what the hell's the difference? I mean, for Tesla, Netflix, it's just people moving a market.
Right, Bitcoin.
Right, exactly. What's the difference? I get that if we need to be fixed to constantly look at why a particular portfolio set from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I get it. I've done it too in my books. But I think that's just foundational proof of the philosophy, and the philosophy is adaptive to the host of markets that appear on the scene. Can you tell me right now, does anybody really think that humans have stopped pushing whatever market up or down? Has anyone seen that stop?
To the contrary, right? You see these stocks just go like, there's no way it can have a PE of 200. Okay, next month it's PE's 300, now 400. To the contrary, the fangs just keep going up.
And you make the point right there in the sense of PE. I mean, can anybody with a straight face really tell anybody that the fundamentals are useful for trading today? That is just 100% bullshit. There is no way.
Right, but you still see the articles of like, oh, this is expensive for historical CAPE ratios.
Why is that? Because a lot of very smart people on this planet spent their youth being indoctrinated in schools with very smart professors. They spent all their time. They spent all their money. They're probably a lot smarter than me, maybe smarter than you. Maybe you did all this. I don't know. But I got to tell you, all that training does not help them to trade these markets at all.
How are you going to price it today? But I think some things have changed market microstructure wise of like now they know these trend followers and they can basically recreate all their models and they are likely to exit their Eurodollar aggregate trades around these levels. So we might front run that a little and that makes the market go through stops and through different levels a little quicker.
That gamesmanship has been going on for a long time though.
Yeah, I think it's a little more sophisticated these days down to the actual bid and offer, putting in spoofed quotes and things like that.
But then if you pull yourself out, diffuse the look and get a little blurry on the lens, and I look at the Tesla trend, and I don't know, does it really make a difference what was going on intraday when you look at a 5-year Tesla trend?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Trend followers have either gone way longer term to whip out that noise over the last 10 years or shorter term. But then you start to see some or the philosophy gets adjusted too. So they might tilt long bias. They might tilt, we need more equities. We could debate it all day. But for you, I think your philosophy is that it's not something that can break because it's a philosophy. How do you break a philosophy?
That philosophy is not any different than all the Sand Hill Road venture capital guys. It's not any different than Jason Blum making movies in Hollywood. It's the same thing. It's not any different than Moneyball. It's the idea that we can't predict anything. We have to take many bites at the apple, and many bites of those apples aren't going to win, but we're going to get some big trends. Ask Jeff Bezos, why is Amazon successful? They tried a million different things. Some of them became Alexa, but you got to try. That's something that we don't really look at in life, at least in the discussion of a life philosophy is. We all want to be experts who supposedly can make one bet and it's going to be right. Whereas if you're making a bunch of bets, you're probably much better off because you're not going to be right. Take a bunch of bets and ride the ones that go your way and let go of the ones that don't.
I always have this conversation with systematic guys and I'm like, well, you're on the phone with the investor. They're going to ask you what you think about oil. And I know your answer is, I don't give a crap what happens to oil. I'm systematic. It can go down. It can go up. I don't care who's drilling. I don't care about this. I'm like, I know that's your answer, but they want to hear you say something smart about oil. So can you just say something smart about oil?
See, you're in a different position than me. You have to be politically correct or have a little diplomacy. You call them investors that actually talk like that. I don't know if I can use the term investor. I think maybe just mindless. I could even go harsher. They're only investors in name only. They're just people in the system being told what to do, and they're just worried that they might do the wrong thing or their neighbor might get better, and it's a vicious circle. And look, at the start of this podcast, we were talking about country comparisons and stuff. Look, one of the reasons America is dying from COVID is from obesity. I'm currently in the least obese country in the world. I wonder why there's 35 deaths here versus 300,000 deaths in America. This is the problem that we have in America right now. It doesn't matter what the subject is. Nobody wants to get real. Nobody wants to get honest, right? And getting honest is to talk about what's really going on. We can't do that anymore. I would just recommend to anybody out listening is just when you look at life, when you look at making an investment or making a trade or figuring out a philosophy, get to something where you can be skeptical. If someone's listening to you and I today And they think, well, Jeff and Mike, they got these opinions or whatever. Don't listen to me. Hear what I have to say. Prove me wrong. Dig it apart. Rip it apart.
Gather the data and make your own calculations.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I wanted to mention just, which flows into what we're talking about. From what you've seen and from your tour, you mentioned, I know Asian institutional, but do you talk to like retail investors there? I know Korea is well known for day trading and Chinese love their day trading. What have you seen out of their investor mentality?
I happened to just randomly yesterday, I've become friendly with many of the large multi-billion-dollar funds in Vietnam. Yesterday, I happened to be at an event where the head of the Ho Chi Minh Stock Exchange was speaking. Quite interesting fellow. And, it's a emerging, developing place in terms of that structure. So it was interesting to hear, and the real debate in the conversation from what the interviewer was asking the head of the exchange was the foreign ownership requirement issues. So the country, knowing that they're developing, is still trying to keep some foreign ownership from dominating, whereas the foreign investors want to come into Vietnam and put more money in, but they're a little worried if the government is a little too strict on things. But I see it from both sides, so it's an interesting yin and yang. And now, of course, something like Tokyo is much more mature, Singapore much more mature. I would say this, though, from a big picture, even more important than talking about any one exchange or any one group of markets in Asia. Highly recommend this to all Americans.
Even though you just told them not to listen to what you say.
They can go verify. Okay, trust but verify. Reagan, Gorbachev, trust but verify.
Ronald Reagan, right.
If you're an American and you're over 50, you might already feel like you're done and you're close to death, whatever. But you're going to have younger people in your life, kids, family, whatever. Here's the reality. If you are pushing your kid to take Spanish in America, you're a blanking moron, okay? Because there is absolutely no doubt that every kid in America should be learning over Spanish. Choose whatever you want to choose. Japanese, Chinese, Thai, Vietnamese. I don't care.
French?
No, there's going to be no middle class growth in Europe or America in the next 50 years. There's going to be a doubling of the middle class in Asia. Asia is going to kick America's ass in terms of growth. Younger populations, eager to get wealthy.
And that's ex-China or including China?
Everybody.
That was Jim Rogers and the China super cycle and everything of like that was happening. Then that's kind of quieted down. But I think for sure people have moved manufacturing out of China and helped the whole region. When the trade war happened, and they're like, crap, we can't have all of our stuff at risk in China.
If the average American has never stepped foot in China, has never stepped foot in the financial district in Shanghai, or has never walked the streets of Beijing, let me tell you right now, don't read the headlines, don't listen to the headlines, but go there and you will see energy, you will see people, you will see stuff happening that you've never seen in the States.
Oh yeah, and just their whole lives are on their phone. They're paying, they're doing everything. They're well ahead of us on many levels.
I'm still American for sure, 100%. I want America to do well, but I think...
You're still a citizen? You didn't renounce for tax purposes?
We're going to have, that was a nice dodge by me, we're going to have a situation where America at some stage of the game will have to feel economic pain because of Asia's economic gain. We're going to have to learn how that works. We're going to have to learn how to navigate that. But I got to tell you, if you got kids right now and they're learning Spanish in America, you are really not a smart person. 75% of American kids as a second language are put into Spanish. That's a crime against humanity. I have nothing against Spain or Mexico, but from an economic development standpoint, from a standpoint of potentially your kids having a better life, they should be learning Chinese, Japanese, Thai, or Vietnamese 100%.
I agree. We do some business in China, which might be of interest to you. And basically, some of these US CTAs have taken their models and put them on the Chinese markets, which aren't accessible except for in-country. But they have directional volatility like the markets used to be in the 80s. So you're seeing some of these returns, and it's like those old John Henry type stuff because those markets move and the retail pushes them around a little bit more, and there's not as much institutional and commercial hedging that kind of caps it. So it's interesting.
Like you said about philosophy, and you just mentioned John Henry in the 80s, but nothing's permanent. So the players that were popular or big at one point in time, it might ebb and flow. And look, let's face it, if you become John Henry and you got $3-4 billion, you don't really care about the rat race anymore. You do your thing. You don't run a baseball team.
Win
right?
the World Series.
Yeah. So I just think it's a philosophy. Everyone knows there has been no stoppage of trends across traded markets. It's just a matter of where and how does one have a strategy to take advantage of the markets that are popping and trending. That's it.
Right. And well, the last 10 years, they haven't been in currencies or bonds, which is the bulk of trend followers' portfolio. So the fault might be, hey, you should have switched around your portfolio versus that trend following doesn't work anymore. We'll wrap up here in a second. I want to finish up with just changing gears a little bit and ask you, you've done perhaps more for managed futures and trend following than anyone else with your books and podcasts and everything. What advice would you have for new managers or existing managers that are trying to kind of navigate the social media and the modern world of getting attention out there?
That's tough, right?
Yeah.
I'm lucky, very lucky in the sense that when I saw Andreessen go public with Netscape in the summer of 1995, I said to myself, well, this is game on. Everybody's going to have a website within months. Everybody's going to be remote working within months. Well, that didn't exactly happen, but it happened for me. It's more of a mentality thing ultimately. If one wants to start a new fund and they try to replicate exactly what everyone else has done, that's going to be tough. But I think also the other trick too is if you're starting a new fund, you're a trader, and you're putting all this time in to get your strategy and everything, well, then how do you become the personality to also be supporting it? I mean, look at someone like Jerry. Jerry Parker was not the guy you see today out talking and entertaining and giving great insights. He was behind the scenes for a long time.
Back in the day, you never could have imagined him on Twitter, right?
Right, but now he's fantastic. So I think maybe that's one way that new people can start. They can look at what people like a Jerry is doing, or even a Tom Basso in retirement. Look how they're navigating. Look, it's going to take time. You don't get to just create a track record and that's enough. You've got to win over the hearts and minds. You've got to have a philosophy. You've got to present. If you want to do anything today online to win fans, to win clients, etc., you've got to become your own version of a rock star. Who's going to pay attention if you don't do it?
Right. I liked what you said. Become a personality. Be a personality.
Everyone is interesting, in my humble opinion, but people don't know how to be interesting to others. So that's the skill part. Like, how do you take your internal interesting and then learn how to broadcast that interesting? That's the trick.
And go multi-channel. Should they write a book?
If they have something to say.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many books I've seen from Harvard professors from my podcast. Harvard professors, people with who knows how much training. The book is 250 pages, and I can usually synthesize it to one sentence.
I have one sentence I want to turn into a whole book of the key lime pie diet. So you can only have dessert if they have key lime pie at the restaurant. It doesn't work so well during COVID when you're not eating out, but I want to turn that into.
I do think my trend following book in some ways could be a one sentence book, but what I did with that book very specifically was to have the big idea, but everything is to back up the idea. That's the point. The point is to say, well, okay, Mike, you've got this big idea, justify it. Well, that's what that book is. Here's the big idea, and here's the justification. It's just a huge research paper.
Right, and boy, is there justification. We end up all the pods asking you some quick fire favorites. So you ready?
I have no idea what you're going to ask me, but I'm as ready as I'm going to be.
Yeah, favorite Vietnamese dish, food dish.
I can't even name it, but it's something with pork and vegetables that I can't name.
Isn't it pho is what you eat in Vietnam?
That is the quintessential American understanding question.
Okay, I'm glad I could put that in my head. Yeah.
There's so many names and there's so many varieties, but there's this one street food lady that Anthony Bourdain made quite famous, and she puts everything you can possibly imagine from pork to vegetables to noodles in this bowl. And I just tend to think that if they served it in the best restaurants in America, the line would be out the door. It's just delicious.
All right, I'm coming to visit just for that. Other than your own favorite investing book?
I think Jack's books, Jack Schwager's Market Wizards books. I know that sounds maybe trite, but the reality is those first two books, especially the first one, filled with guys like Ed Seykota and Larry Hite, people that I became friends with. What Seykota and Hite say in that first book still jump off the page today. What are we, 30 years later, 32 years later, something crazy like that?
Yeah. He just came out with a new one, right? Of Unknown Market Wizards.
Yeah, I just talked to him about that. That was a great interview and some great stories in there. Amazing stories, actually.
I haven't read it yet. I'm going to have to go read it. Favorite place to travel inside Vietnam?
I was just on a plane the other day. I don't know if I have an exact answer, but I was just on a plane the other day for the first time in a year to a place called Dalat in a little mountainous area that I think the French originally made as a retreat. It's quite nice, quite peaceful. It felt like the Virginia countryside or perhaps some parts of West Virginia. I mean, it was kind of pines and it was not tropical at all. It was quite nice.
What's the French historical connection?
They came over here, colonized the place, and caused a lot of problems. And then America, in its infinite wisdom, allowed the French to come in and out several times, especially after World War II. The French saved face. But ultimately, it's really interesting. Even though the French caused a lot of problems, Vietnam has been occupied by 4 different countries in the last 2,000 years: Chinese, Japanese, French, and Americans. The Vietnamese really don't have a fondness for the Chinese. I don't hear them speak highly of the French, but they sure love the Japanese and they sure love us.
Good. For once, we're on the right side.
Japanese taste in engineering is highly valued in Vietnam. And that I love, because if the country can ultimately get to Japanese taste in engineering, then that's a positive.
Favorite turtle trader?
Well, it's Jerry Parker, because he's the one that I've got a chance to know the most and talk to the most. But I will say, and he's passed on, that Mike Shannon, who I interviewed for my Turtle Trader book, was the most interesting, because I was told when I was doing this whole investigation, and it was, look, I was threatened with lawsuits, not by Jerry, but I was threatened with lawsuits by a lot of people in the turtle world to write that book. Okay, they didn't want that book out. I had one turtle tell me that I was going to be sued. If this turtle's name was even in the book, I was going to get sued. Like, what's the predicate for that lawsuit? I don't know if I follow that.
They were concerned the rules were going to get out there and then their performance wasn't going to be as good. What was their general beef, or just...
There was so much secrecy built around it, and I don't know if it was respect for Rich. But this guy, Mike Shannon, I had been told was an interesting guy, and it took me a while to track him down. And I remember doing a call with him. He was living in Australia. I asked one of those questions that I don't ask often, but I was kind of like, is there anything that I've not asked you about that I should know about that you need to tell me about? One of those questions. And he said, oh yeah, did I tell you I was a criminal? I was the largest coke dealer in Chicago. I was working for Rich and I was an undercover agent for the DEA and he didn't know. I was like, I didn't know any of this.
Yeah, okay, good follow question. And he's passed away since?
Yeah. I'll tell you a crazy small world story just to show you how small the world is.
Smaller than Marty Bergen being your baseball coach?
A young guy that works in Vietnam in his 20s. He listens to my podcast. He finds me. He's working for a Singapore family office that has billions under management. One day, this German owner of this family office is in Ho Chi Minh City. So the young Vietnamese guy takes me to meet his boss. We start talking. He was friends with Mike Shannon. What the hell? I mean, you're just like, how did that connection happen?
And lastly, we'll ask all our guests favorite Star Wars character.
Yoda,
I like it. He would have been a trend follower for sure.
Look, if you live in Asia, like I have for a while, you get a certain Zen mindset. And I'd much rather have a Zen mindset than the mindset that I grew up with in the States. We haven't talked about this, but that Zen mindset, that philosophical Zen, is very much trend following.
Right. Like, hey, trends are going to happen. Just relax. They'll be here. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to overthink it. I like it. Are you a surfer? You kind of have a surfer mentality as well, in a good way.
Well, I mean, it depends on what I'm surfing.
Yeah, surfing the trend, surfing the waves.
This is the PG conversation. The R-rated conversation, you have to show up in Asia and speak with me in person.
Perfect. Over a beer. They have good beer, right? Vietnamese beer is pretty good.
I don't drink really anymore, but there is a lot of beer drinking in Vietnam. Yeah. A lot. It's not fun when you do any kind of event in Asia if you're not really drinking, because every Asian guy from Tokyo to Beijing to Singapore to Ho Chi Minh City, you go out at night. I mean, it's a competition with brown liquor to see how much you can drink, and I can't drink any. I have to be very strategic about how I navigate.
We've had some of the Chinese partners over, and they bring this just gasoline from there that they want you to drink. You're like, finding every way I can to throw it over my shoulder.
Hey, look, I'm not a prude. I did my share of growing up drinking everything under the sun, but you ebb and flow with it. Right now, it's ebbed out of me. So
I'll drink something, but the gasoline is just a little tough on me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and now that you taught me, I need to ask anything else that I should have brought up or that I need to know, Mike Shannon style.
This is one that it's not R-rated, but it's going to be for some ears. Maybe they'll think, well, that's too much. I got to tell you, look, when I came to Vietnam, I was single. And I have to tell you that as a guy who grew up, I'm 52, as a guy who was looking at Paulina Poroskova on the front of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues, 82, 83, right? And seeing that type of physique, and then to unfortunately, and I think this is part of why we're having such a problem with COVID, with the obesity, to see the expansion in America, and then come to a place where, look, I'm a guy. I'm not apologizing for that. But to come to a place where I can see the feminine form more like Paulina, that's a game changer in life. It's not the same in America anymore. It's changed. I would love to see it change back. I would love to see us go the other way. And I'm not just picking on ladies. Obviously, obesity is an equal opportunity employer in America, men and women, of course.
I put on about 10 pounds during COVID, constantly grazing through the kitchen.
I put it on, and then I've lost 30 pounds since May.
Wow, good. So your eyes were open, seeing all these beautiful Vietnamese women, and then you met a Vietnamese woman. You said you're not married yet.
I don't know that the beauty is also related to just a physical appearance. There's a different attitude. There's a softness, a kind of a tradition. It's just very different than America. It feels older. You could talk to somebody, you could talk to a woman who's 25, 35, 45, and their mentality, they might look absolutely drop dead gorgeous, but their mentality is like grandma. Their thinking is older. It's interesting.
All right. Well, as soon as this lockdown ends, we'll come visit.
Nobody from America will come visit, only a handful, because when you have to stop and think about it, you're like, hold on. Mike is probably crazy.
That's what makes me want to visit.
He's in a communist country. We had a war there. Spike Lee just made a film that says there's landmines and machine guns everywhere. People might listen and say, I'm going to go, but then they're not going to go.
But it's still become, before COVID, it was growing as a tourist destination, right? I knew some people who'd been there.
It's pretty rare, to be honest with you. It's pretty rare. It's very unusually rare to me because when you're here, you're like, wow, if most Americans could experience this, they would be floored.
I'm done. I'm in. All right, Mike. Well, enjoy your day. It's your 9 a.m., us evening here, but enjoy your day. We'll have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much for being on.
Hey, thank you. Take care.
This was fun. Let us know when you write your next book.
It's coming soon.
Nice. What's it about? We didn't talk about that.
Trend Following Mindset. It actually is a book based on my podcast interviews with Tom Basso because he really helped to launch my podcast.
I love it. All right. We'll look forward to it. Thanks, Mike. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, Trend Following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.